I'm coming out the jacket cause we're turning up the heat. I wanna see you clapping when you get about your seat. It's time to make it happen when we hit these streets. I'm coming in hot and I can't be beat. Watch out now. Everybody watch out. Watch out.
Welcome everybody. It's episode 64 of Agencyphonics. I'm here today with the delightful Tara Austin. More about her in a second. Just first of all, I just want to say the audiobook is now live. For those of you who were chasing us for ages to create an audiobook of Agencyphonics, it's now out there. So make sure you go to Audible, or you go to get your free copy, or you go to Apple Books. And it's full of so much useful information for anyone running an agency, so check it out. I just want to have a massive thanks as well to Sante Group, because these podcasts, our community, everything is run as a social enterprise, not for profit. None of it can happen without sponsors helping us, and Sante Group have been really, really supportive by actually helping us fund everything that we're doing in that area. So a massive thanks to them. You can get them on nugentsanti.com. We'll put it in the show notes, because there's no point you trying to type it down now. But bottom line is if you want to offer health support packages for your team members, and including mental health support packages, then you speak to them. They are an amazing company. So Tara Austin, you're at Ogilvy. What's your kind of day job?
That Ogilvy is my day job, yeah. And I have a whole other part of my life, but I started at Ogilvy in 2009.
Wow, so you're almost like sort of really are sort of part of the foundation there, really.
Well, I am and I'm not, because I left for about 3 years, and then came back during Corona, actually, which is a bit wild. But it feels like I've never left. And I was a WPP fellow reject, and then the most wonderful man in the world, John Steele, about 6 or 7 months after I hadn't got through into the fellowship, he recommended me for a planning job at Ogilvy. And I grew out of I was a baby planner, which no one was at the time. There weren't any junior planners, but grew out of the strategy team there and into the behavioral science team that we set up, that Rory and Jez set up, and I ran the first ever experiment there. And then now I work exclusively really for the behavioral science practice within the agency.
Very, very interesting. And what's it like working with Rory?
Wild. I just absolutely adore him. He is. Yeah. I've got to say, the thing that people don't really necessarily appreciate about Rory is that he is obviously a creative genius. He's a creative genius. We all know that. But he is such a deeply generous man, with his time and with his energy and with his creativity. And I've worked with so many brilliant creative people in my time, but he does not have the same kind of ego that most of himself, just very, very freely, without any real thought to his own career reputation.
Yeah.
I mean,
for those of you who don't know Rory Sutherland, if there is anyone out there that doesn't know who he is, I think I always sort of recommend just dig out the original TED talk he did, where he has this wonderful articulation of talking about investment versus experience, and just watch it. And once you watch that, and then pick up Alchemy, which I think is his latest book, or certainly the latest one I've read. Yes. Which is again a delightful book, and I think anyone running a business, just a gentle reminder of the importance of creative and lateral thinking in everything you do. And I just I will get him on the show one day, and I will interview him. I've been building up to it, but Tara, the road to get to this point today has been sort of a bit long and winded for me, because I had actually worked it out this morning. I did a post on it. It was 2019, and the Advertising Association ran a debate at the Houses of Parliament. And the universe works in mysterious ways, because as I was debating, there was a screen in the corner of the room talking about the legalization of magic mushrooms. It was, you know, a psilocybin, and it was actually on a screen in the corner. It was clearly another debate that was going on in the debating house to the side, or it was happening over adjacent building or something. So, but we were talking about the impact. Why was it that in agencies the people reporting, you know, mental health challenges is much higher than average ordinary businesses? And the debate sort of centered around, at the time, pre-pandemic, very much around the fact that the culture of pitching, the demands of the long hours, the late nights, you know, led to, you know, a culture sometimes of needing, you know, needing substances, let's call them polite here, to, you know, to keep people going. You know, I have an agency in the Hampshire, in the sort of suburbs, and I used to compete against these London agencies and wonder how they could put so much time and energy and cost and into these pitches. But you know, the culture sort of clearly built up over the years. And then just before the pandemic, we were debating, was it really the client's demands that were causing this? If we could stop the pitch process, if we could stop, you know, if we could make working more flexible, less, you know, what could it happen? Anyway, it was a fascinating debate. And I was actually arguing that clients do cause most of the mental health challenges because of their tight deadlines. And to be fair, it was a little bit of a, you know, a cheeky kind of debate, because the reality is that no client does that intentionally. But, you know, but when it maybe
it would have been interesting to have some Danish agencies in the room to see.
Yeah.
Of course, you know, we talk about agencies and of course, but national culture, working practice, I think is really deeply important, and the social norm, the expectations that people have, and that's what's been so brilliant about Corona, really, is this moment of habit discontinuity, as they call it. Everything changes, and everything changes everyone all at once, and therein is an opportunity to really shape the businesses that we want to have. And
I mean, the number one kind of request that going into the pandemic was that from agency people was they wanted more flexibility in their working. And we had the horrible Japanese story where someone had been way to work horrendous amount of hours and had, you know, committed suicide. But I think what I'm trying to get to here is that, you know, the pandemic sort of created in many ways a new world order for agencies, and it gave us a lot of chance, I think, for a lot of people to reflect and to look at new ways of working. And I'm a big believer that society and the way that we work and the way that it's structured leads to a lot of mental health issues. And I think if you go back and you look at the South American tribes, for example, and, you know, they have all these Westerners turning up to try medicines like ayahuasca or San Pedro or peyote, and they all go, all these crazy Westerners are all coming in because their life, their society is structured in a way that leads and causes and creates mental health issues, which, you know, people in more tribal situations don't really get because of the support systems, the ecosystems, you know, the way that the atomic family today is transformed the way that we live on this earth. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, if I get to all of that, is I've been working really hard to try and remove hierarchies in organizations and to bring in flat structures. And I find that the cultures are happier when I do that. The people actually, they do generally work less hours. It doesn't mean that people don't work hard, they do, but they work smarter because they're more empowered and more trusted. And I feel like mental health is a complex thing, and there's a lot of areas to cover here. But the reason that I sort of found myself gravitating towards you was you wrote this wonderful headlining campaign that said, you know, why Adland needs more drugs. That got my attention. And of course, then I noticed that you were talking about psilocybin. And so therefore I was then really interested, because I understood a little bit around this molecule DMT that's found in plants and humans everywhere. And I started to sort of tune into that world and to understand that the connection between, you know, what traditional tribes use as medicines and traditional cultures use as medicines, we have kind of dismissed and marginalized as a recreational drug. And we've lost many, many years of research into
many millions of people. That's the really tragic piece, is that, you know, it's such a terrible crime against humanity that in 1971 we said no more science. thank you. We will trample all over every hope that we have that these molecules, these compounds can help us, because they were already more than promising. I mean, we had 40,000 people who'd been through clinical trials using psychedelic medicines before the research was shut down in the 71. And we could see already, we're not just talking about depression, we're talking about alcoholism, we're talking about these intractable problems, PTSD, you name it. Now they're doing work on anorexia, they're doing work on behavioral addictions like gambling, and we're starting to see the underlying mechanisms of the mind and how the mind works. These medicines can aid us in so many of our mental health challenges that realistically we have lost millions and millions of people, I believe, unnecessarily, without having any real way of treating them when the medicine was there right in front of us and it grows out of the ground. Yeah. So that's the real tragedy. It's the one that we have to end as soon as possible.
Yeah, and help me understand this, but it felt a bit like, there was this, the backstory was very much the Vietnam War happened. People in the 70s, the psychotherapists and psychologists were starting to do clinical trials on these compounds and were getting unbelievable results. There was some people manipulating results badly, but overall there were some good stories there. But the war, because people who took psychedelics became very much connected and like there was almost a more spiritual connection, a more connection to the planet, to that they almost became anti-war, and Nixon saw that as a threat and then started to almost create this war on drugs, because they saw that ultimately this medicine was actually stopping they couldn't control the fact that people didn't want to start a fight, because once you go through some kind of psychedelic process, you actually feel a little bit more connected to the universe, don't you? Like, people who go through this process always describe it as being one of the most profound experiences of their life.
Well, I wouldn't say they always describe it like that. And in the
psychedelic, hasn't, so maybe that's not everyone, but yeah.
In the psychedelic world at the moment, it's a little bit contested around. There are some who are using the term like ecodelics, who are saying and suggesting, and Rick Doblin, who is one of the great leaders of this movement, very much feels that when these medicines are allowed to do their work, and allowed to, people are allowed to access them rightly, then we will have a more spiritualized humanity, is the phrase he uses, that people will be more connected to their environment. And there is this lovely idea that Rick also has popularized, that astronauts, when they go off planet and they look back and they see the whole Earth as one, it's an extremely moving experience, but it really has a very profound impact on them, because they see spaceship Earth and they realize that everything that they've ever known, ever will know, everything they've ever loved is there, and it's all one system. It is one ecosystem, and you get this very much this whole view, what they literally call the overview effect. And it's a very powerful thing. It's why the astronauts basically come back and become environmental campaigners, because they realize this is the only planet we've got. And Rick, I think, is pretty fond of saying that, you could go off planet or you could have a psychedelic experience, because it very much does the same thing. Even when we're looking at the in-brain response, the right hemisphere of the brain doesn't use words. It's not myopic. It is totally macro. It understands how things connect together, and the kind of the synthesis of everything. It has the overview, if you like, and in a psychedelic experience, you are literally connecting the whole brain together, and you are getting fundamentally perspective on your life. It's that perspective that heals so many people. But it's a lot cheaper to go to have some mushrooms with someone for 4 to 6 hours than it is to fly off the planet. So I like to think that Rick is right about all of that.
And I think one of the most profound examples of what the subject we're talking about today was there was a BBC show that followed the Imperial College London, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, the clinical trials that they were running using psilocybin to see whether or not it was an effective treatment for depression and for people suffering with many different levels of depression, because it's a huge percentage, isn't it, of people that who take antidepressants that actually it doesn't work for them at all. A third
of people who will take antidepressants do not respond. There are millions of people suffering from treatment-resistant depression in this country and in the rest of the world. The extraordinary thing about antidepressants is that I'm not going to say they don't serve a purpose. They can absolutely serve a purpose. But why you would take something that has such, in some cases, such extreme side effects that it may well cause you to kill yourself. This is the thing that people don't appreciate, is that these are serious chemicals. Just because so many people are taking them does not mean to say that that is right. And that at the moment, they are very much the de facto treatment for mental health challenges in this country, which is a real problem, considering I don't think anyone that looks at the Imperial Center for Psychedelic Research, one of the latest papers from earlier this year was the first real study showing head-to-head escitalopram, the leading antidepressant, and psilocybin derived from magic mushrooms. If you look at that data, there is absolutely no doubt anyone who can read a graph would prefer to try the psilocybin, a one-off treatment of a number of hours, yes, but that effectively treats you. And I have to be really careful about what I say, because a lot of people in the community, don't, and a lot of the academics get very uncomfortable with words like cured. It's cured me. But I can tell you that there's absolutely no way that I would like to be taking a pill that changes my brain chemistry, potentially ruins my libido, may make me suicidal, will have potentially very, very significant withdrawal symptoms, even sort of, not being able to sleep, all of the side effects that come with both coming onto antidepressants and then, actually the withdrawal from them. Would you have that, or would you have a one-off treatment? And I think the comparison for me is really like surgery. Yes, you can take a pill and you can numb yourself every day and you can bandage up if that's what you want. But this treatment, as it is surgery. I'm going to go in there, I'm going to cut out of you the thing that is hurting you, and then you're going to heal up. That's the intent, at least. And people do say to me all the time, they don't say it's helped me, they say I got my life back. That's not I'm better than I was. Oh, I was in such a bad place before, but now I'm okay. Now I'm all right. And of course, antidepressants do have a function in helping a lot of people live when they otherwise couldn't. And I don't want to take away from that, but we need the other option on the table, which in the clinical trials, you are twice as likely to be in remission from your depression, having had a psilocybin treatment than an antidepressant treatment, is what they showed.
Do you think that that some of the other problems around this have actually been because I guess, and it's affectionately called plant medicine, the medicines that psilocybin, the compounds that come from organic plants effectively. Do you think that that's always had like historically this kind of like spiritual battle versus scientific? There's almost like, well, the science says this, but it's only really the people in spirituality who believe that, that certain plants can heal you, but do you think that there's some kind of...
penicillin is a plant. This is the funny thing. I keep saying to people,
it's a mold, isn't it?
Like, penicillin, you could argue, was one of the things that won the war. And whilst psilocybin will not cure everything, and yes. I am an evangelist, and I am a utopian about these medicines because I believe in a better future, and I think that they represent that. But that's not to say that I think that they can cure absolutely everything that's wrong with our society. But I wouldn't want to live in a world that didn't have penicillin either. And I think this is our generation's penicillin moment, that we have this opportunity to now harness what, just like penicillin, is a mushroom or a fungus, and to use that for the betterment of humanity. But it is funny how we have historically, we've split off the plant medicine from science and from the medicine.
It's almost like we've sort of like said, just because you live in a tribe in the jungle, what would you know compared with this? It's like this sort of psychological thing where actually I think people who discover, things, medicine like ayahuasca or like San Pedro or peyote, they say, well, what these guys have this, like they've had access to these incredible plant medicines, and we.
So did we. So did we. We've just lost it. This is the thing. Our memory is very recent. All our memory, our collective, our cultural memory is very, very recent. We still don't know a lot about like how they built the pyramids and the Sphinx. Like they're all there, and we did it. You know, humanity did it, but we don't retain that information. And it's coming out now in the archaeobotany and all of this amazing data and research that's being done. It's without a shadow of a doubt, the ancient Greeks at the Temple of Eleusis, where they were celebrating Dionysus, were using ergot, which is a fungus that grows on barley, from which LSD is derived. So you might think of LSD as this sort of magical, liquid, tiny chemical little amounts, but it comes from a fungus that grows on a plant on barley. And the ancient Greeks, and maybe even Jesus, actually, there's some strong evidence to suggest the whole water into wine, putting stuff in your mouth, sacrament, may have originally involved some psychedelic element in which people could access God. But without a shadow of a doubt, and the Druids, for whom we have no real record in this country, we as humanity have been consuming psychoactives and psychedelic medicines for probably as long as we haven't been monkeys. There are some who theorize,
and now we have a mental health
famously the stoned ape hypothesis suggests that our brain actually grew as a result of psychedelic usage. And there is now some evidence too that psychedelic medicines do cause neurogenesis. The campaign that I'm running is, one of the big reasons that we're fighting for these medicines. And I should say, I don't do it for Ogilvy. My Ogilvy job is my day job, but this is the work that I do it's my passion. We're fighting not just for mental health treatment, but we're fighting for the more research to be able to happen in this country, because which of us wants to live the end of our days with Alzheimer's or serious kind of neural degeneration? These medicines do offer hope for treatment. They are treating traumatic brain injury. We are hearing from people, and I'm meeting people all the time who have effectively grown their own brain back. It's astonishing.
It creates the neuroplasticity of taking these medicines. Actually, it certainly enhances your brain activity, doesn't it? And actually, there are some dangers for certain types of people to do this, and I think you're right to make that clear. There's been strong evidence that people with histories of schizophrenia and psychosis possibly no way going to be able to go down this route, but it does.
It's contested, and we need a lot more research.
Oh, really?
The only reason I say that is because a man called Stanislav Grof, who gave LSD to hundreds of thousands of patients, I believe, before this kind of research was shut down, he was treating psychosis and schizophrenia using LSD in order as a treatment mechanism. Whilst right now you would not be included on any of the clinical trials if you had a history of schizophrenia or bipolar disorders, there are those who are, particularly with, say, ayahuasca, who are treating bipolar disorders through every 3 or 6 month treatments with that medicine. So it's not totally clear where we're going to end up with them, but certainly I would absolutely not recommend. I mean, I wouldn't recommend to anyone that they take any psychedelic medicine outside of a real supervised environment where somebody really knows what they're doing. These medicines are and can be dangerous. They can traumatize people. They can traumatize the people that you're with, and they are dangerous. But they are not physically dangerous. You'd have to consume more than your own body weight of mushrooms for you to have a problem, and it wouldn't be the psilocybin that would be a problem. It would be the fact that you'd eaten that much mushroom. Realistically, there's a lot more research that we need to do. It's all just a natural part of
I want to come on to
this.
I want to come on to that, Tara. I want you to explain about the great work you're doing, because I think when we first spoke, I was really impressed by the fact that you were publicly talking about this. And I'd just read an article previously about someone in America who was microdosing mushrooms as a way to deal with his stress levels in work, and the company had fired him because of that reason. And I saw what you'd written, and I thought there's still some stigma around this, and I thought I'd like to come out too, because I believe from what I've seen and witnessed firsthand and via many, many people, the benefits, and having spoken to you, you know, validating almost a lot of my own personal experiences as well. But I really wanted to share the story from the BBC, which everyone should go and find. I think it's on Netflix now, with a different title, and I'll make sure we get all these in the show notes. And I would ask everyone to go, who is listening today, please go on an educational journey yourselves to look at this, because
you won't regret it. You will not regret spending any time understanding what is the future of humanity. And I say that as someone who sounds like
close to us who's suffering right now. And
well, yeah, and this is the thing, for every one of us who is suffering, or for every one of us who is what they call a healthy normal, we have friends, family, colleagues who are suffering, and whether it's depressions is just one part of this, but you know, alcoholism, tobacco addiction, anorexia, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Traumatic brain injury, you know, there's so much. Cluster headaches sufferers have these suicide headaches. This treatment is one of the only treatments we've found that allow them relief.
So one of my closest friends, who actually also is an ex-agency owner, he suffered horrendously with cluster headaches. You know, just go on YouTube and type it in, and you'll never experience it. It's almost probably the most painful experience any human being can have. And I was talking to him the other day, and he was saying how excited that he was that in America they had now been doing the clinical trials on MDMA and PTSD, and also they'd discovered that and a few other of the, again, just to explain to everyone, they're investigating a lot of different compounds. So a lot of them kind of derive from one called DMT. But ultimately they found that, you know, things that we previously were quite scared of, names like ketamine, MDMA, because we're taught, actually when they put them into clinical environments and they put them with you know, a combination of doctors or psychotherapists in controlled environments, the results are incredible. But the story I wanted to get to, Tara, quickly, because I really want you to kind of like explain this sort of to me as well, to everyone listening, is on the show, there's one person in particular, and I don't know his name, but he was around, I'd say a 65-year-old gentleman, and he has a change in his job, and he suddenly gets depressed because he's been moved from a job he loves to a procurement department which doesn't bring him joy, and overnight something happens to him. He goes into a state of depression, and he was probably one of the most depressed people I think they'd had on the show. And they said he was on, you know, pretty much, you know, he tried every single antidepressant. And I felt really sorry for his wife. His wife was there supporting him, and it's quite an emotional kind of show to watch. And he was asked to go on the clinical trial. And what's the name of the doctor? Because you know them all really well.
Professor Nutt.
Professor Nutt, and there was another younger doctor as well on the show.
Dr. Robin Carhart-Harris.
Yeah. These guys are fantastic. Anyway, so he goes in, and he's an elderly guy, right? It's not like he's someone young going in to do this, you know, cyber sitting. And he goes in, and he's got a psychiatrist with him, and his psychiatrist has worked with him for a couple of years and was unable to fix him through psychotherapy, through psychiatry, because he said he doesn't understand the patient, what his actual problem is. He doesn't understand what he's got to fix, and therefore it doesn't matter how much we talk to him, the thing that is locked away needs to be released, and there's no way to release that. So he does this, he goes through the clinical trials, and all of a sudden the neuroplasticity, everything, the magic works of these compounds, he then is taken back through an experience where he goes back to his childhood, and he sees the memory that's been locked away and hidden, that's protected him all his life, where he was rejected. And so, of course, where later in life, when he was rejected in his job, that came back again. That emotional, you know, defense mechanism within his system came into his, whatever it was that did it. You probably know the science better than me. But he never, ever would have ever probably uncovered what that core problem was, being a 5-6-year-old a gentleman whose father had tried to kill him, who he didn't even know or remember. Well, you know, it was, you know, all he could remember was being suffocated. But because he now knew that, and he'd been able to, through that process, forgive his father, forgive his mother, go back to where he lived, and the psychiatrist, psychotherapist could work with him to then to take him through. And I think that example for me, and Tara's just frozen on me, I'm not sure she's frozen for everyone else, I'll keep talking until she comes back. that process for me, I think, really articulated well the power of these things. It's not necessarily that everyone needs to go away and start taking psychedelics, but the fact is that these medicines in the hands of psychiatrists and psychotherapists have clearly given a whole new set of tools to professionals to be able to help assist in this kind of battle against mental health. Did you get any of that, Tara?
I did. You cut out for a moment there. I think
you got the gist of what I was saying when I was sharing the story.
Yes, and there are so many stories, and you're right. People should go on a journey. That documentary that you're referring to, the psychedelic drug trials, following the team at Imperial, is very powerful. Actually, the most powerful story for me on that program was a young nurse whose friend had committed suicide, and it had sent her into a serious well of depression, and she'd been signed off from the NHS for, I think, more than a year. Within one treatment, 3 days later, she was back in the hospital. She was back helping other people, treating other people. Like, the ripple effect from treating our mental health in this country is vast. We cannot even anticipate yet how, when we treat people's trauma, we not only treat their trauma, we treat domestic violence, we treat obesity, we treat acquisitive crime that comes from addiction, and most of these opiate addictions, I've never met an opiate addict who is not traumatized. Alcoholism, the works. We fix so much when we fix our mental health, that really I am a utopian in that I genuinely believe that the world of tomorrow is going to be a much, much better place, and that not enough people have really heard the good word yet. I often feel like some woman wanging on about the internet and how it's going to be a really big thing and how it's going to change everything. But I don't think people really anticipate, maybe because we don't really hold it in our hand out here as a bit of technology. You go, oh, it's a Tesla powered thing. If Tesla invented this medicine and it allowed you to do what this medicine is allowing us to do, it would be a great
one of the greatest inventions ever made.
It's like vaccination or the pill, though. The difference is, because this is an organic innovation, it's going to radically shape the world around us, and yet we sort of take it for granted. We completely take the pill for granted. We completely take vaccination as a technology for granted, because we've never seen the alternative. We've sort of just it's ubiquitous now, how it's shaped who and what we are. It seems less obvious than these phones and these screens. We give a little bit too much kudos to that, when really our world is shaped by what's going on inside our heads, and there's so much that we can do and improve.
Can you explain to us really now where we're at in it? Because what I saw last couple of years ago was that Canada had legalized psilocybin for end of life, meaning that if someone was terminally ill, they were able to be prescribed psilocybin to be able to assist them. And can you explain what it actually does for someone who is terminally ill?
Yes. So Canada haven't legalized it, although the state of Alberta has decriminalized. Canada have a special access program, though, where basically you can basically write to the health secretary, and she will personally sign off your access to that medicine. So a guy called Thomas Markle, who first did that, so stage 4 cancer survivor. And the reason that so many people living with a terminal illness want to access these medicines is it's incredibly frightening. End of life distress is very, very distressing. What will happen to me? What will happen to my family? Can you imagine waking up every day, not being able to sleep at night, Googling how you might be able to come out of the other side of this? What mad treatment might you be able to receive that will save you? The distress is very real. And a colleague and friend of mine, Dr. Laura McDonald, she's a young woman, and she was given a stage 4 cancer diagnosis, skin cancer. And she's a doctor herself, and so she knew the seriousness of this. She survived it, but actually there was a huge amount of survivor's guilt from being on wards surrounded by people who did die, and at the same time, why me? Why has this happened to me? What have I, all of these challenges. She is a psychiatrist, and she sees patients all the time coming to her with this with this extreme depression, end of life distress, and she wishes that she would be able to give them what she was able to experience out in the Netherlands on a psilocybin retreat, where she was able to make peace with everything. And the thing I would encourage anyone to watch alongside the BBC documentary is pretty straight, if I'm honest. Like, it's
but
very,
that's why I kind
very,
of get people to start with that, because I think it gets you to see the kind of the clinical trial side of things, the sort of, you know, the before and after response of people going into a hospital. Because I think it's also worth saying, is because I mentioned this, that the great thing about the process, you probably explains better, is it doesn't matter really what your belief system is. It's whether it's scientific and you go to a hospital, or it's spiritual and you go to some kind of ceremony, or, you know, it can work for you in any way, can't it?
Oh yeah, I mean, it really does. It really does. It works with you. There is no therapist. You are the therapist.
Yeah.
It will provide you. My belief system around these medicines is that they will provide you with the experience that you need in order to heal. Now, people have very challenging experiences, and not every experience is the same as the next. And perhaps the first experience you might find might not be as healing as subsequent experiences. But, you know, certainly anybody with any kind of belief system, or no kind of belief system, is welcome to, you know, hopefully in the future, when we have legal medical access to these medicines, and shamanic access, which is already the case in some parts of the world, but when they have that sort of safe access, that they will have their own experience of themselves, because you are experiencing your own consciousness. That's the most,
almost like
the most wonderful revelation of all.
A picked up dream process, isn't it, really? In a way, sometimes your dreams can be very cathartic, they act in weird ways, you know, but and it is very different, to be very clear, but in a way it's for some people that's a nice way for them to understand it. But when you talked about the end of life access, I think, would it be fair to say that most people who they lose the fear of dying by taking these medicines?
I think that would be fair to say. And in the clinical setting, or with and I've seen people in this position myself, they make peace with their death, and they often say they get their life back, what they have left. And I would encourage anyone interested in this. Really, there are the film Fantastic Fungi covers this very well. On Netflix. Fantastic Fungi, beautiful film for all the family. But the other one really to take a look at now, Netflix is doing a great job for the revolution, is Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind, which is also comes from the great book that he wrote. He's a New York Times bestseller. Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind on Netflix it has many different testimonials from people, both from depression, cluster headaches, end of life distress, PTSD, those who have been using the medicine. And there's a lot of, what's great is it starts to demystify some of the treatment as well, to show people kind of what happens in those rooms. And it's an amazing insight. If you've ever seen someone on a psychedelic journey, and when they do speak, it's often some of the most profound things you'll ever hear in your life. And people make peace with all kinds of things. People forgive their torturers. People, make peace with their death. People meet God, whatever they conceive him, her, it to be. They have an experience of life that is totally not what we normally have, but it very often gives them back the meaning of life in the process, and it teaches them a lot about themselves. And the best psychedelic experiences, and I hasten to add, that's with a guide, with a therapist, with somebody who knows what they're doing, with a shaman, however you want to play that, is with somebody who can guide you through that experience. There is great insight to be found there about yourself. And this comes actually back to my job, because my day job is talking about system 1 and 2, as Daniel Kahneman puts it, talking about the conscious and the subconscious mind, and how in the behavioral science practice we use what we understand about the subconscious in order to influence people and to do the jobs that our clients pay us to do. But basically, system 1 is is where you go in the psychedelic state. Everything I've really learned in the latter half of my life about psychedelic medicine and is one and the same with what I didn't really know earlier on about how the deep automatic brain works. And the sad thing is that most of us go through life not understanding ourselves at all, not really understanding who or what we are, why we have the patterns of behavior we are. It's very common. Michael Pollan says psychedelics are wasted on the young, and they absolutely are, because up until the age of about 25, your brain is still forming. It's only really when people get to about, I'd say 30 or so, that they recognize that they might have a need for psychedelics. And that's because they start to recognize that they have a pattern of behavior. Oh, I keep getting involved with the wrong man, or why do I keep shouting at my family? What is it? Why am I so unhappy in my work? Whatever it is, it starts to become ingrained around that period, because life is no longer new and fresh as it was when you were a teenager and in your early 20s. You start to see these patterns, and psychedelics can help you understand those patterns. Where did they come from in the first place? And almost invariably, they come from an earlier time, often childhood, not always, but often childhood, and memories that may be repressed, or just situations. I mean, there's some famous cases where there was no one to blame for an early childhood trauma. In one case, famously, Stanislav Grof was looking at the case of a man who had been sort of accidentally kind of smothered by a cow when he was a very, very small baby. And this had actually led him in his very formative years of his life for his brain to form around the idea that he didn't really have any agency in the world. He wasn't powerful. The world wasn't a very good place. And these early thoughts and sensations and without even words, because we don't really need words. As a species, we lived for a very long time without them. That these thoughts and impetus had formed in him in such an early period that it was only through the psychedelic state that he could really go back and investigate that and understand it and clear it away. People often describe the actual experience as if you're going down the mountain on skis in a rut, and every time you're going down that same rut, and that rut could be alcoholism. I want to drink, I want to drink, I want to fag, whatever it is that you're addicted to. But that thinking could also be confirmation that you're no good. That person looked at me funny in the shop. We know that the brain is a sort of confirmation machine. And once you've selected something, or you've noticed something, you will notice it again and again and again. And so this rut deepens and deepens. Yeah. Psilocybin and other psychedelics are very much like a fresh layer of snow. Now, you can choose to ski down the mountain in the same place if you really want to. And if you choose not to, what we call integrate your experience and to understand what you've learned coming out of it, if you choose not to make the most of the plasticity of your brain following a psilocybin experience, then that's for you. But the clinical treatment shows pretty clearly, and lived experience of millions of people that have been using these medicines for millions of years, that actually, if you process that experience, if you take it, use it, harness it, that you can be free of your depression. Yeah. The people that have just come back from the Heroic Hearts veteran retreat, they have to go abroad to have treatment for their military experience, which is frankly criminal, I think. But Heroic Hearts, those veterans, went there with PTSD. They went to the jungle to take part in an ayahuasca retreat. They've come back. And they know, not, I think a single one of them clinically qualifies as having PTSD. The knock-on impact to their friends, their families, their children is really, it cannot be understated. So I am a bit of a utopian about this.
I think what you beautifully described there, so thank you for that. I think you articulate that so nicely. And because I always called him Michael Pollan. Now I've got to call him Michael Pollan. But,
psilocybin.
Yes. But and I still don't know what it is. Effective. It's psilocybin, is it? Psilocybin.
Depends which side of the Atlantic you're on, really.
Oh, really? Okay.
I've given up caring now.
But what you described there beautifully was, this setting of, you have a problem, you set an intention, or you're almost asking your brain, you're saying, here's the problem, the challenge I have. And it's amazing the power of that, of the intention, that setting that intention, setting that question. And then the setting being the environment, which you talked about, the environment that suits you, whether it be a shaman or a doctor.
Yes.
I mean, funny enough, I've met so many neuroscientists, psychologists, psychotherapists, GPs, more people actually who've told me stories about this from firsthand than probably just other lay people. It's fascinating to see that it doesn't discriminate. This isn't just, for certain type groups of people. And then lastly, the integration piece, because from what I understand, you are right. Now, in the case of those the ex-servicemen, it's unlikely that they're going to go back into a war scenario. So maybe, but a lot of people who come out, I think, of this psychedelic medicine treatments, sometimes they go back to their lives, which are just the same as they were before. And in a way, that integration just erodes back to where you were, because you've got to sometimes come back and make changes to the way
but it can make you more resilient in the just a couple of days ago I was at an event for PTSD and psychedelics, and there was a fantastic presentation from a man who is an active police officer, so it was pretty lively for him to be there, and it was the first time he'd come out, if you like, publicly in this space, so it was all praise to him. But he's a detective. He was suffering from PTSD. You see a lot of trauma. You are traumatized through a lot of these jobs. We're seeing people, a lot of NHS staff, particularly those who went through coronavirus, they need treatment. They're leaving the NHS. Otherwise, they're burnt out and they're traumatized. And these medicines can give people, and I've seen it myself, give them their lives back such that they feel ready to go back into their very meaningful work and to do that job. And actually, certainly he was saying, as a policeman, that his experience with the medicine had made him a much more compassionate generally. It had allowed him to see the people that he was dealing with more as human beings, rather than, as people to be marshaled. And that's, I think that's also important, that there are those who are looking at these medicines as sort of preventative in some ways, for those who are on the front line of our world and who will be traumatized in the course of their career. But at the moment, there is very little help for people.
So let's get to the crux of this. How do people listening and people that are listening in the future to this episode, how do people? I mean, the first thing I want to sort of, I want to come out today as well and say that I'm going to be more public on this. And I'd like to support you as much as I can, and hopefully maybe other people as well. But what can we do to help you? Because you are sort of leading a charge around trying to change the status of cyber. Can you explain what it is you're doing and how people can help you?
Sure. So a small team of us have been lobbying for some while now and talking to politicians to try and raise this agenda to make sure that the legislation moves with the times and moves with the rest of the United States and the rest of the world. In fact, we don't want to be left behind. And I'm very clear that if people listening to this may be thinking, right, I need to try that. And the one thing I don't want is them to have to do that in unsafe circumstances with people that might exploit them, or traumatize them for that matter. So it's really important for me that our politicians are really ahead of this. But it's only been in the last year that a small team of volunteers like me have come together to create this campaign, which we call the PAR campaign, because psilocybin begins with a P, which is a bit of a pain, but we call it the PAR campaign because it's just a nice shorthand and means people don't have to say psilocybin, which is awkward for them. So PAR is our thing. And if you go, the first thing I would say is go to PAR.global, PAR.global, sign the government petition. The government allowed us to have a petition live asking for the rescheduling of psilocybin. Now, that doesn't mean the reclassification. It doesn't mean that there will not be a penalty if you are caught in possession of magic mushrooms on the street. For now,
to be clear, at the moment, it is it is a class A drug. Class A drug, which is the most serious.
Yes, you're talking 7, 14 years. Very, very serious amounts of time. And but the real problem at this immediate moment in time, because decriminalization is the way that hopefully the world will go in the war on drugs generally. But what we're asking for is the rescheduling, and that means medical access for licensed professionals. Morphine is a class A drug, but it is a Schedule 2 substance because every hospital pharmacy carries morphine and it needs to. It's a medicine. Now, at the moment, psilocybin is a class A drug and a Schedule 1 drug, which means it has no known medical benefit. The FDA declared psilocybin a breakthrough medicine in 2018. We are well behind on the medical benefit. And whilst there is some research that is happening in this country, it is nowhere near enough compared to the rest of the world. We are lagging behind. And historically, the Home Office has been resistant. There's been a lot of inertia, as well as, frankly, very, very outdated, stigmatized thinking about these medicines that just is a hangover of 50 years ago when we didn't know any better. But we do now. We have the science. We've got to follow the science. Please sign the petition, share the petition. You can volunteer, you can donate, but most of all, we just need people to talk about this and share it. And we've got letters and postcards that you can write to your MP, talk to your MP. You know, that's what they're there for. And they need to stand up in the House and ask a question. We had Charlotte Nichols, Labour backbencher, just the other day, asking Chris Philp from the Home Office about this medicine. He said in his reply, he said she was talking about psilocybin for mental health for these challenges and the scheduling. Charlotte's very much one of our home girls on this. She's doing a great job for us. And he replied that the molecules she was talking about was an MDMA-based therapy, which is obviously completely untrue. They are completely totally different molecules.
Yeah.
So he wasn't as enlightened as he should be, but the overall his response was quite different from what we've seen before. And I was with a very, very right-wing Conservative MP very recently in a very safe seat, or maybe not in the next election, but when I started talking about psilocybin for traumatic brain injury, which is an interest of his, he said to me, "Oh, I've seen it in the Telegraph." Every conversation that everybody has, and particularly the nature of anyone who's working in PR, communications, journalism out there, every opportunity to tell the positive story about psychedelics, and specifically, you know, we're fighting for psilocybin because it's the one that really ought to lead the charge. But any conversation, any celebrity endorsement, I've got fabulous T-shirts that we're going to start selling on our website in the next couple of days at PAR.global. We're probably going to march on Parliament next year is the plan, if they don't give us the rescheduling by then. So do sign up for the newsletter so that you're aware of that. But it's really the conversation that we need to have around the dinner table. Why are we call our campaign Psilocybin Access Rights, because we ought to have the right to access these medicines when we need them. And I think anyone who's known somebody living with end-of-life distress, why we would not allow someone with end-of-life distress who's going to die anyway to have the cognitive
anybody taking, you know, antidepressants that are not getting better, you know, and who doesn't know someone like that? I mean, I think
everybody, and this is the other thing, is that everybody suffers. We all suffer. Yeah. We might not call it depression, but there's always these sort of stats: 1 in 4, and you know, and we talk about in our industry, everybody suffers at some point in their life. We all grieve. We all, you know, relationships end. We find ourselves not where we want to be and we do have to deal with some of the traumas of our past. Divorce is a very, very difficult thing for people to go through. And these medicines can and should be there to help people. I mean, the work that's been done not on psilocybin, but on MDMA for couples therapy is actually really remarkable, and I think is really the future of marriage, if I'm honest. I don't know any couple that doesn't struggle after a long period of time to come together.
Gives you empathy, doesn't it? I think that's the thing that people say, because it's an empathetic thing. But I noticed in America that the federal government had actually given Johns Hopkins research the first federal grant recently. It was like the first federal grant done in 50 years, and it was done on this area. And you know, this should
tobacco addiction, I think, wasn't it? Was it tobacco? I think it was for tobacco addiction, because there is. I mean, this is the other thing. People think about tobacco addictions if it's you know, like somehow some kind of mechanical addiction, and these other things aren't. It's all one and the same. They're all being treated by the same underlying mechanism. We know as much as we can now that the default mode network in the brain, the resting brain state, the brain that is taking you down the mountain in that rut in the skis, that is effectively sort of switched off during the psychedelic state, and the connectivity in the brain allows it to reset. There's a lot of but sometimes people talk about defragging the system, and you can get rid of the junk that's in there that you don't realize. And the amazing thing about the first psychedelic experience you ever have is that, particularly if it's in a therapeutic environment, is you will start to understand there is a lot more going on inside your brain than you ever imagined. And I do training all the time on the behavioral sciences. And one of the things I was talking about was cocktail party effect. We refer to it as, where when you are in a cocktail party or in an office, of course, somebody says your name across the other side of the room and you hear it. The reason you hear it is because your brain is hearing everything all the time, but you are not conscious of that. The only time you hear it consciously is when it floats it up into your conscious mind, because that person might be plotting to kill you or to destroy your career, and you tune in because you need to have that information. It's relevant to you. We call this the cocktail party effect in behavioral science, but it's all about one and the same thing, which is our brains are so much more evolved, advanced, automatic, and opaque than we ever possibly imagine. We are not transparent to ourselves, and we don't understand our deep motivations. Talking about them in therapeutic processes can help. By the way, psychedelics aren't the only way to access some of these memories and this connectivity.
Yeah, we're seeing a big uplift in breath work. I was going to say that
is another way that you
just
can
tuning in.
access the same state.
I'm just tuning into that as well, and I'm seeing that actually the sort of the breath work and the people taking the cold ice baths, and it also creating similar impacts on capillary, and enhancing blood flow and neuroplasticity as well. It's fascinating. There are all these areas that it's just about time that there was more awareness of them, and that more people. And so, I think, we're running out of time now, Tara. But I think you've been one of my favorite ever guests now. I think you've been very brave to come out and talk about this. It's almost like it's a risk, isn't it, when you've got a professional job, like the guy in the States who was microdosing, who then got fired. In the end, I think we'll look back on that probably 20, 30 years from now and think, time's up. I don't know what happened there. Tara's disappeared. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to get Tara back, and we'll probably need to continue this conversation and maybe go into a bit more detail with it, and maybe give an update on how things changed. We'll certainly put everything into the show notes, all the links. Please get behind PAR.global. I'm going to be doing that. I believe ultimately we can all play our part in, towards changing the future of our planet from a sustainability, environmental, but also mental health. This week, the Telegraph, I think it was reporting there is officially a mental health crisis on, and I think we all owe it to ourselves now, people power to all play our part and get behind this incredible and go away, do your own research on this, investigate, read the data. It's incredible. People getting cured from alcoholism, not with years of 7 steps, but within 48 hours after taking one dose, go through one session with this medicine. These 80%, that's just incredible. And the impact on society, just the cost of supporting the NHS and the knock-on effects. And also, Tara, you mentioned the Americans. I'm like, I don't want to be behind the Americans on things.
It's ridiculous if we're behind the Americans. I mean, that's not good.
Yeah, surely we have the agility now to be able to make, and to streamline these kind of decisions. You would think. I mean, I'm not saying they shouldn't go through the relevant processes, but we should be able to accelerate these things. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. PAR.global, get the word out there, get it on celebrity, faces and tweets and shares, and we really need to. If we sign the petition, if we hit 100,000 signatures by February, we will get a debate in Parliament.
Where are you at right now? I did sign it already. Over 10,000.
We're over 10,000. So the government has given us a very inadequate response and a circular response. And I should say, by the way, just one last thing. We call ourselves Psilocybin Access Rights because part of the government response was effectively saying that medicines will be able to be licensed if they go through a particular kind of process. And that's sort of true for very, very particular kinds of molecules that are under patent. This medicine grows out of the ground. It should be available on the NHS, and that is what we're fighting for. So please go to PAR.global. You shouldn't have to spend £15,000 in a clinic to maybe access this, or to have to go to Jamaica or Brazil to get hold of these medicines. Everyone that you know, someone you know out there, needs them, and they need them now, not tomorrow. We lose 18 people every day to suicide in this country, but there is hope, and this medicine represents that. So please, PAR.global, sign the petition, share, join our social channels, and thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. You know, there isn't, in my mind, you know, there isn't an industry in the world like the marketing and advertising world. I think we're always the radicals. We're always the people that, you know, can invoke change. And I hope the people listening here today can connect to this and do their small part to help build the momentum that's needed to take this whole thing forward. So Tara, thank you so much.
And if you want to make ads for me, come talk.
Yeah, anyone out there wants to do ads, that sounds great as well. I like the idea of the celebrity. People are working with celebrities or hear of first-hand stories with celebrities. It's a very good way to start to raise. I noticed that 9 Perfect Strangers, Nicole Kidman, I don't know if you saw the show. It seemed to me that also the American TV shows were slowly starting to normalize some of these things as well. Although obviously maybe, so it's becoming more known. But anyway, we could talk forever, so I will get you back.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Have a lovely weekend. Thanks everyone for listening. Until next time, that is a wrap. And hopefully Abby's